Hello and welcome to the Success Showcase. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin with the Modern Observer Group. And with me, as always, is Chip Janiszewski from the Happiness and Success GPS. Chip, how you doing this week?
I'm doing great. How about you, Eric?
I'm doing well.
We're
As
halfway
we
through February almost. Valentine's Day is this Wednesday, and last year we hardly had any snow, and we have another significant storm coming in tomorrow after a really nice stretch of weather. But they're saying prepare for 8 to 12 in Connecticut, but that's the way it's supposed to be in February. Record
Yeah,
temperatures again on Saturday, and the only reason I know that it's 2 years in a row is because it's my son's birthday. But the last two February 10th, it has been 62 degrees here. So, and
yeah,
it's
the
not be too cold on Wednesday, but just cold enough to put a bunch of snow down. So,
yeah, the Northeast is supposed to get hammered. I heard one newscast saying New York City was preparing for Snowmageddon. And they actually haven't had a massive snowstorm in about 7 years. So New York is preparing for that. New England is preparing for that. And hopefully the rest of the country avoids the nasty weather.
yep, yeah, this one seems like it's kind of coming from the south to the northeast. So, you got farther south, I think it's going to be a lot of rain. But
Yep.
anyway, we'll see. We're just 2 weeks from March. Yes.
All right. So, if you've been listening to the podcast for the past few weeks, we've been talking about communications. We talked about active listening, we've talked about storytelling, and now we're going to sort of put all of that together and talk about how to make a presentation and how to get your ideas across in both a conversation, an interview, or even a full fledged formal presentation to an audience. Now, when I say presentation, a lot of people think PowerPoint. And while that is a type of presentation, it's not the only one we're going to be talking about. Anytime you are trying to convince somebody of something, whether you are a job applicant trying to convince someone to hire you, a salesperson trying to make the sale, or a public speaker in front of an audience, all of these are types of presentations. So that's what we're going to be talking about is how you can best express your ideas and give them weight. And that's really an important part of it is giving your idea weight because nobody is going to take your idea seriously if you don't have some sort of credibility. And you can present credibility in a number of ways. If you are an acknowledged expert in a subject, you've got credibility right there. If you're not an acknowledged expert, you can borrow the credibility of experts by quoting the experts, by providing statistics and figures that the experts have put together. So, by doing your research and really knowing the facts, the figures of what you're talking about, and the sources that these facts and figures came from, you can borrow the expert's credibility and use it for your own presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really, really important to basically keep your message as simple as possible and just really stick to the main point that you're trying to get across. It's important to have passion about what you're talking about. It's important to start strongly so people know exactly what this presentation is going to be all about and to engage people. And just like the different things we've been talking about for the last several weeks, it's really, really important just to be genuine, to be yourself. Um, we talked about storytelling. It's really, really a good point to put a story in there to really make your point a whole lot stronger, especially if it's a personal situation that you've been through. But again, I mean, presentations are all about just engaging the audience, having a conversation with them, sticking to your point, keeping them interested along the way, give them a chance to answer questions at the end. But instead of hitting them with a whole hour of just facts and so on and so forth, where you're reading across a PowerPoint presentation, It's best just to keep it simple. And if you want to give them a whole lot more information, that's what handouts are for.
Yes, and that's something that's important to remember that your presentation is not simply what you're saying or what you're showing on a PowerPoint slide. Your presentation can use so much more. You can use audio clips, video clips, handouts. You can put charts and graphs together and distribute those to show the effect of what you're talking about and tell stories. As we said last week, people identify with stories. They react emotionally to stories. And those stories cannot just get your point across, they can also give you credibility, especially when you're talking about a personal situation. Your story explains why you know this topic, why you can be considered an expert at this topic, because you're explaining how you went through it and you're telling your story. And that's something else that's very important that we touched on last week, that stories elicit an emotional response. You can beat somebody over the head with facts and figures. If they don't connect to you on an emotional level, they're not going to want to adapt to your idea. They're not going to want to adopt your idea. When you tell somebody this is how something should be done, most people go, well, why should I listen to you? If you have connected with them on an emotional level and you've proven your credibility with the facts and figures, that combination is what gets your idea across. It's what builds acceptance of an idea.
Yeah, absolutely. In the book TED Talks, they talk about three different sections: emotion, novel, make it novel, and memorable. But under the emotion section, they talk about mastering the art of storytelling. And it says the best speakers are the ones who, quote, break down the wall with stories, because stories plant ideas and emotions into a listener's brain, just like we talked about a couple of weeks ago with your story and the other stories that are there. Basically, stories will illustrate, illuminate, and inspire. So it's really, really important where if you can integrate that in, it's touching on emotions. It's not just talking about different things, but it's talking about real life so that you can identify with people, and it's gonna hit something inside of them.
Exactly. That emotional connection is the difference between talking and presenting, and more importantly, convincing. You want your audience to come away saying, yes, that's someone who knew what they were talking about. I accept what they say. And now I'm going to go act on it. Well, it doesn't go to that last stage where getting people to act on it is so important without that emotional connection. And then, as Chip just mentioned, the second part of that is being memorable. And that is so important. We've all sat through talks where you walk out of the talk and 5 minutes later, you can't remember anything that was said because they didn't make that emotional connection and it wasn't memorable. And a great way to make your presentation memorable is to do something unexpected, because that makes an impact. And it could simply be asking an unexpected question. And I've talked about this before. When I do workshops on how to network, the first question I ask the audience is, how many of you are introverts? Now, this is a fairly standard question. It's not unexpected, but it does get them involved. And some people will usually raise their hand. When I follow up with, okay, so how many of you are introverted, but were too shy to raise your hand the first time I asked the question? That's unexpected. Nobody expects to get asked the same question again, just a little differently. It also makes them laugh. And usually more people will raise their hands because there were people that were too shy to raise their hands the first time. So that immediately sets the tone. It makes the audience more comfortable, but it also provides that impact. It's something that they remember.
Yeah, it's a great way of getting them engaged. Basically, uh, by doing that, having them raise their hand, basically what you're doing there is you're getting everybody in the room to raise their hand at one time or another. So even if somebody's been sleeping through the talk up to that point in time, they are now engaged by doing that. Um, it's really important to teach some people something new or a new approach to something that they may already know to get them engaged. Basically, again, in TED Talks, it says the human brain loves novelty. An unfamiliar, unusual, or unexpected element in a presentation intrigues the audience, jolts them out of their preconceived notions, and quickly gives them a new way of looking at the world. So if you can take something where all of a sudden people are going to go, "Wow, this is really really cool. This I'm engaged now." Just like you're talking about, then just beginning the talk, but then teaching them something new or a new approach to something. I mean, basically, that's what I'm doing this year with my platform for support, for my platform for kindness and that kind of thing. And I did a presentation first time doing that last Friday for the West Hartford Chamber of Commerce, and I built it up with all the stuff that's going on in the world and so on and so forth. And I said, take a time out. Very simply, we were all created from the same good source. And then we took that, and on top of that, we put our human source, which is our ego, which invented the words and all the conflicts and all the stuff that's going on in the world. But that source where we created is still there. And I just put that together. And I said, when I got to my kindness platform, I said, if you can put that in connection, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, because I know I did this presentation, but if you could put that on top of everything else as the original, the very first, above and beyond all others that can be used with all others. That's a new concept. And I got a lot of reactions last week and got a couple of appointments. And there's one person that wants to do an article about me just because of a new approach to the same thing that I've been teaching, which is the power of positivity as being a choice.
Yes, a new approach is very powerful. It changes people's perspectives. And it doesn't have to be a completely new perspective on an entire topic like Chip is discussing. It can be something small in the course of your presentation. Very often, I do a lot of audience participation when I do talks. And if it's a small enough group, I will sort of mix things up a little bit where instead of simply calling on somebody to answer a question or asking the question to a general audience and have people raise their hands, or I will take a koosh ball and throw it into the audience, and whoever catches it, that's the person who gets to answer the question. So and I don't tell them that I'm going to do this ahead of time. I just pull out the koosh ball, toss it up, and yell catch, and whoever catches it is like, okay, you're in the hot seat. Here's your question. And it shakes things up. It gets people's blood moving. And if somebody wasn't paying attention, they are now, because now they know at any point during the presentation, something can come flying into the audience towards them.
Yep. No, that's a great approach. I mean, I have fun sometimes when I'm running my networking meetings for our local chamber of commerce, facilitating that. And the first thing I always ask is how many people are here for the first time? And the few people that raised their hand, I said, okay, first of all, tell us that again when you do your commercial. We'll all clap for you again. And then I pointed somebody there and said, okay, you're running the meeting. And that always gets an aha moment and people laughing, but it lightens up the whole group at the same time.
Yes.
If you're facilitating something, instead of just going through the motions there, I mean, it's a form of doing a presentation, is facilitating a meeting and get everybody else involved. And so if you can make that fun and they know that you're having fun, it just goes through, it blows through the whole audience. The reputation there for that meeting that we have is just so good that people are just attracted to that from everywhere. And we tell people, I mean, if you want to experience what this chamber is all about, just invite them to this meeting because that's what it's about. and they'll love you for it. And that's just the way it is. So um, make it fun.
And that's so important, especially in a more formal meeting format or a presentation format, when you're talking to an audience. Unfortunately, we have reached the point where almost without exception, a good 10% of your audience is texting on their phone, is scrolling through social media, and they're not actually paying attention to the meeting or the presentation. So you need to be able to grab their attention. That's actually one of the reasons I started with the koosh balls, because it's very difficult to focus on your phone if you think something's going to come flying into the audience and hit you in the head. You need to get people engaged. And it's so important because engagement leads to those emotional connections that we were talking about. So all of this comes full circle. It's getting their attention, it's getting them engaged, and then it's making that emotional connection. And that's where you have your impact. So I'm going to say that cycle again because it's very important. You have to get their attention. You have to get them engaged. You have to create an emotional connection, and then you have your impact. And it all starts with the old joke. You know, why did the farmer hit his mule with a shovel? To get his attention. Now, I don't recommend hitting an audience member over the head with a shovel, but you have to get their attention, whether you do it with a joke, with something unexpected, with a story, however you choose to do it. The first step is getting the attention.
Absolutely. It's so important to start off with something that is memorable for the people there instead of just getting right into it. And they're going to be able to tell you right away whether you are engaged or not. So it's really, really important to get yourself psyched and be passionate about what you're talking about and realize that you are very good at talking what you're talking about too. Oftentimes I go to networking meetings when people get up to do commercials, even though they know what they're going to talk about, they'll stand up and the first thing they're going to say sometimes is, I'm nervous. And when people say that, whether they're doing a commercial or doing a presentation or whatever, I always say, you're the only person that knows that until you let us know. So you just got to go up there with confidence and just let things flow. And that's the way things work. Get them engaged right off the bat.
Yes, and you do have to be confident. It doesn't matter if you're quaking in your boots inside. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of stories of famous actors who, before every performance, would throw up because they were so nervous. But it didn't affect their performance because once they got past that, once they got on stage, they exuded confidence. They became the character. They got into the speech. And that's what you have to do. And sometimes that's actually a very good thing to do, is to think of yourself as getting into character. Yeah, public speaking is the most common fear in the US today, probably globally. And in fact, Jerry Seinfeld talks about the fact that, public speaking is the number one fear. Number two is death. So if you're at a funeral, most of the people there would rather be in the coffin than giving the eulogy. But if you think of yourself as a character, you're CEO of the presentation, whatever it is, and you walk out and you put on your costume, your suit, your, whatever it is you're wearing, and think of yourself as playing a character. It's not you that's up there, it's the character you're playing. And that has a tendency to put people at ease when they're too nervous. Oh, what are people going to think of me if I screw up? If you think of it as playing a character, well, it's not you that screwed up, it's the character. And sometimes that can also be very effective. There was an old comedian, I'm sure Chip will remember him, Foster Brooks, who would come on stage and he would give speeches pretending to be completely out of his mind, inebriated, drunk. And he was so good at it that in one of his first appearances, he was playing the head of a chamber of the local chamber of commerce. And he came out, convinced the audience that he was absolutely drunk to the point that people were going, oh my God, how is he going to go back to work after this? He had so much to drink here. And of course, he wasn't drunk, but that character was much easier for him. It didn't matter what he said, it was a character. And of course, when he would start talking after the presentation, people would realize, oh, he was pretending. It was a joke.
Yeah, he was amazing, and he did some really unbelievably funny skits with people like Dean Martin and this and that, whatever. He'd walk into the bar and so on and so forth, and pretending to be Dean Martin's doctor or dentist or something like that. But the bottom line is, you know what you're supposed to say. If you're an actor or anything, even on stage, you know your lines and so on and so forth. But guess what? Even if you forget something or you mess up, if you lighten up and you just flow through it, the only person that knows that is you. Nobody's going to know anything. So if you miss a point in your presentation and so on and so forth, just let it go. It's really, really important to stay comfortable with yourself, realizing that you're not perfect. And obviously, the last thing you want to be doing is just reading off of a screen every word that's going on there too. You got to keep it light and keep the audience engaged and make yourself the attraction and not what they're looking at on a PowerPoint presentation.
Exactly. And it's also very important to realize that if you do make a mistake, one, everybody makes mistakes. It's not a big deal. But two, it seems a lot worse to you than it does the audience. I remember being in a play back in school, and I had forgotten a line. And to me, it seemed like I was standing there forever trying to remember the next line. And somebody else on stage whispered the line to me. And I went on, I said the line, and then remembered the rest of it. But it seemed like that went on forever. After the play, I was talking to some people in the audience, and nobody noticed because what seemed to me to be an interminably long pause was only a few seconds. So nobody had realized I had forgotten the line. They just thought it was a dramatic pause
Yeah,
and not a long one at that.
absolutely. I mean, people don't have a copy of what you're doing up there. So it's just let it go. Do the best you can do. And sometimes if you forget something, make a little bit of fun at yourself. I mean, if you denigrate yourself a little bit and can laugh at yourself, that's going to get people a whole lot more relaxed with you also. So, oh, wait a second, I forgot this 5 minutes ago, something like
Yep.
that. But
Yeah, and it's important that, especially if you're using slides, PowerPoint, Keynote, whatever it is you're using, you shouldn't be repeating what the slides say. The slides are already there. Your audience knows how to read. You need to be providing information that's not on the slides. And in fact, within Google, if when they have business meetings, they actually prohibit their presenters from putting more than one sentence on a slide. They're expected to be able to talk because that's what the difference between a presentation and a handout is. There have been many, many presentations that I have gone to where 5, 10 minutes in, I have realized that all the speaker is doing is reading the slides, and I've already been given a handout of those slides. Well, guess what? I don't need them to be read to me. I can read them on my own time. So I walked out after 10 minutes and gotten the better part of an hour back to my day because they weren't providing any new information other than what was on the slides. And also, when you're just reading from slides, there's no entertainment value. You do need to entertain to hold your audience's attention. Again, it's very easy for your audience members to slip into checking their email or flipping through social media or texting while you're talking. If you haven't engaged them, if you haven't connected with them, you're going to lose them.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of handouts, the only time you should pass out a handout is after your presentation. And this is presentation 101, because what are people going to do if you give them a handout? They're going to read it, and you've lost them already. So keep your handouts to the end. You can preface your talk saying you don't have to take notes or whatever. Just listen to me because I'm going to give it to you as a handout at the end of my presentation. That's a great way to go in there. And if you do miss something during your presentation, they won't, because you're going to give it to them in the handout.
Yep. And again, a handout doesn't need to be the slides that are appearing on your screen, assuming you're using slides. Handouts can be flyers, they can be magazines, they can be anything you want in any format you want. It's the information that's important. So if you can give that information in multiple formats, it makes it that much easier for your audience to absorb, because not everybody learns the same way. Some people are visual learners. They're the ones that want everything on the handout or on the slide. Some people are auditory learners. They want to listen to you. They may want to take notes. Some people are experiential learners. They aren't going to get much out of a talk. They need a workshop. They need to participate and do things themselves to really learn. So you have to be able to provide your information in multiple formats so that people that learn in different ways can all absorb your information and be able to act on it. So the old clock on the wall says we're just about out of time. So, Chip, what do you think is the big takeaway from this week?
Go in there, have a strong start, be your passionate self about what you're talking about, have a story to tell, teach people something new. In other words, be creative and have fun doing what you're doing out there. And everything is going to go very well. You got to keep the audience engaged by just keeping them off guard a little bit, and just have fun, relax after you throw up before the presentation. Just kidding.
Yeah, I think for me, the big takeaway is one, grab your audience's attention, whether it's a large auditorium or it's a single person that you're talking to. Grab their attention. Then get them engaged in what you're saying and make that emotional connection. Once you've done that, they're going to absorb what you said and they're going to be able to act on it. And let's face it, if you're giving information, you want your audience to be able to act on it, whether that is taking what you've taught them to improve their business, or simply in the course of an interview, you want somebody to hire you. There's an action that you want your audience to take. And to get them to take that, you've got to make that connection. And that's the important part, is building that connection. You've been listening to the Success Showcase. You can catch every episode of Success Showcase as well as the rest of the Xvadio Podcast Network at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts. Remember, make this your best week ever and make next week even better. We'll see you then.